Alright, so this code snippet is basically importing some essential libraries for data analysis and visualization in Python.
It's like gathering all the necessary tools before diving into the data work.
We have NumPy for numerical computing, pandas for data manipulation, tsne for reducing dimensions and k-means, and dbscan for clustering stuff. Then, there's make_blobs for making synthetic data metrics for evaluating clustering performance, standard scalar for scaling features, and css_notebook for sprucing up the Jupyter Notebook output. Oh, and don't forget about the addutools package for some extra notebook functionality. These libraries help set up the environment for tasks like clustering and dimensionality reduction.
When we talk about standard scalar, it's usually for getting our features in the right shape before running machine learning models.
The sklearn library provides solid implementations of various machine learning algorithms and metrics for evaluation. And hey, with css_notebook, you can style the notebook output to make the whole data analysis experience visually pleasing.
So yeah, these imports are laying the groundwork for some serious data work. So basically, this code is importing the necessary modules to create interactive data visualizations with the bokeh library in Python.
It starts by importing the bokeh plotting module as bk, which allows us to access functions for plotting charts. Then, it imports the palettes module from bokeh to access predefined color palettes. Now the fun part.
We use the bk output_notebook function.
This function is cool because it lets us display interactive visualizations directly within a Jupyter Notebook. Isn't that awesome?
Overall, this code sets up all the important stuff we need to make visually appealing and interactive plots for data analysis and visualization right inside a Jupyter Notebook using the bokeh library.
Cool, right?
So basically, this code here is importing some modules from the matplotlib library.
Matplotlib is a pretty popular library for making plots in Python.
The line %matplotlib notebook, that's telling matplotlib to use a specific backend in Jupyter Notebooks.
What that does is it lets you have interactive plots right in the notebook. You can zoom in, pan around, and even make some real-time changes to the plots. So we are basically setting things up here to create interactive plots using matplotlib inside of a Jupyter Notebook. Cool, right?
So this code snippet is all about creating and visualizing simulated blob data using k-means clustering.
Let me break it down for you. First off, the code generates isotropic blobs, but with the wrong number of clusters initially. Then, it transforms the data to be anisotropic by applying a specific matrix transformation. Next, it creates blobs with varying variances and uneven sizes. Each type of generated data then undergoes the k-means clustering algorithm to identify clusters based on their patterns.
The make_blobs function from scikit-learn helps in creating the synthetic data, while k-means clustering algorithm is applied with different parameters for each dataset.
To visualize the data in predicted clusters, the plt scatter function is utilized, coloring the data points accordingly. The plots are arranged in a grid using plt subplot. Finally, all the visualizations are displayed together using plt show. This code essentially showcases how k-means clustering works across different types of data distributions. It's a neat way to see the clustering algorithm in action.
So this code right here basically creates a dataset using the make_blobs function from scikit-learn. It's going to have 1,500 samples and 10 features. It's like when you want to make up some data to work with. We set it up with 4 cluster centers and a standard deviation of 0.4 to make it more interesting. After running the code, we print out the shape of the dataset X to see how big it is. When you see the output of print X shape, it'll tell you something like 1,510.
This means there are 1,500 row samples and 10 columns features in the dataset X.
It's just a way to understand how the data is structured and to get a sense of its size and shape. Basically, this code is showing you how to create a dataset with specific characteristics so you can use it for analyzing or building models.
It's a handy trick for generating synthetic data for your projects. So this code here is using the tsne distributed stochastic neighbor embedding soon algorithm to reduce the dimensionality of our input data X down to 2 dimensions. We start off by initializing the tsne function with a few parameters. We set the number of output dimensions to 2, the perplexity value to 30, and the random seed to 0 for reproducibility. Now let me explain how the TNE algorithm actually works. It takes our high-dimensional data and transforms it into a 2-dimensional representation, all while maintaining the local structure of the data points. Once we've applied the tsne transformation to our input data X, the resulting 2D representation is then saved in a variable named Y. We achieve this by using the fit_transform method of our initialized tsne object called tsne. To wrap it up, the code concludes by printing out the shape of the transformed data Y. This allows us to visualize how many data points were successfully reduced to 2 dimensions.
So this code is all about creating a scatter plot using the Bokeh library in Python.
Let me break it down for you. First, it initializes a figure object with specific dimensions and a title. Next, it goes on to plot the scatter plot. It uses data from Y, where Y0 and Y11 represent the X and Y coordinates of the points to be plotted.
Now, here's an interesting part.
The points are plotted without any fill color, only the outline color is specified. If there is a variable called pal that stores a list of colors, it could have been used to assign different colors to the points based on some prediction stored in Y_pred.
And finally, the plot is displayed using the Bokeh show function. When you run this code, you will see a plot showing points from Y0 G1 to D with optional filled colors based on the pal variable and the specified outline color.
Cool, right? So this code basically does k-means clustering on a dataset with different numbers of clusters.
It goes through a range of cluster numbers, makes silhouette plots to see the clustering, calculates silhouette scores to judge the clustering quality, and shows a scatter plot of the clustered data.
It's a way to see how good the clustering is for each cluster number. The silhouette score tells us how well a point fits its cluster.
And then we get to see these scores visually, and the scatter plots color the data points by their clusters. We use matplotlib for all the plotting stuff.
It's a helpful code to figure out the best number of clusters for our dataset by looking at scores and plots.
Hey there. So this code snippet here is basically creating a synthetic dataset. It's using the make_blobs function from the sklearn datasets module to generate 750 data points spread out across 4 clusters.
Each cluster is centered at specific coordinates. The data points have a standard deviation of 0.4, and the random state is set to 0 for reproducibility. Once the dataset is generated, the code utilizes standard scalar from sklearn pre-processing to standardize the features. This means it centers and scales the features so that each one has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1.
This step is important for many machine learning algorithms that work best with standardized input data.
The transformed dataset, denoted as X, is then ready for further analysis or modeling in a machine learning pipeline.
It's all about preparing the data in a way that makes it usable for various algorithms.
Cool, right? So, the metrics, pairwise_distances x mean code snippet, essentially computes the average distance between all pairs of data points in the dataset X.
What happens is that it calculates the distance between every possible pair of points using a chosen metric, like Euclidean distance, and then finds the average of these distances. Now, when you see palettes, category 10.5 what it's doing is trying to pick the 6th color from the category 10 color palette.
This typically suggests that there might be some visualization involved, because in Python, palettes are not really a standard part of the language's functionality. It's likely referring to a plotting library or some custom module that defines such palettes specifically for visual purposes. So the gist is that this code is probably aiming to choose a particular color from the category 10 palette to be used for plotting or styling visual elements in the code.
So basically, this code is all about using the DBSCAN algorithm to cluster data points.
DBSCAN stands for Density-Based Spatial Clustering of Applications with Noise. It's like a clustering algorithm that groups data points based on their proximity. The idea is to find clusters of points that are close to each other and also identify outliers or noise points that don't really belong to any cluster.
Now in this code, we have this variable x that holds our data points.
We feed this data into the DBSCAN algorithm, which has 2 important parameters. EP is and min_samples. EPS is the maximum distance. 2 points can be considered in the same neighborhood, and min_samples is the minimum number of points required to form a cluster. After running the data through the algorithm, we create a mask to identify core samples and extract the cluster labels assigned by DBSCAN. Then we count the unique labels to find out how many clusters were formed, adjusting for noise labeled as -1.
Next, we calculate something called the silhouette coefficient.
It's a measure that tells us how well defined and separated the clusters are. The coefficient can range from -1 to 1, with higher values indicating dense and distinct clusters. In a nutshell, this code clusters our data using DBSCAN, figures out the number of clusters, and evaluates the quality of the clustering using the silhouette coefficient. It's a pretty neat way to organize and understand your data.
So this code is all about creating a scatter plot to visualize clusters in a dataset using the DBSCAN algorithm.
First, we set up the plot figure with specific dimensions and a title that shows the estimated number of clusters.
Then we extract unique labels from the clustering results and assign colors to each label using a spectral color map. Next, we go through each unique label and plot core and non-core points as separate markers in the figure.
Core points are shown with a larger size, while non-core points are displayed with a smaller size. If a point is considered noise, represented by a label equal to -1, it's plotted in black.
After that, we adjust the title font size and display the plot using the Bokeh library's show function. So essentially, this code helps us visualize clusters in our dataset using the DBSCAN algorithm in a nice scatter plot.
So what this code snippet does is it starts by creating a dataset using the make_blobs function from scikit-learn. It makes a dataset called X that has 400 samples split into 4 clusters, each having a standard deviation of 0.60. The random underscore state is set to 0 to make the results reproducible. After creating the dataset, it modifies X by slicing it along the second dimension using -1. This slicing operation basically flips the order of columns in the dataset. This kind of manipulation can come in handy in various situations where you need to transform or reshape the data before doing further analysis or processing. In essence, this code snippet generates a synthetic dataset with 400 samples and 4 clusters, and then it tweaks the dataset by reversing the order of its columns, potentially changing the data structure for subsequent tasks or analysis. Alright, so this code here is a Python function that's designed to create a plot showing the results of k-means clustering. The first thing it needs is a trained k-means model, along with the input data x that you want to visualize. Additionally, you can provide optional parameters like the number of clusters and a random seed if you'd like.
First, the function uses the k-means model to predict the cluster labels for the input data x.
Then, it sets up a scatter plot using matplotlib.
If you haven't provided any axes, it'll create a new one for you.
The points on the plot are colored based on the predicted cluster labels using the Viridis color map for a nice color scheme. Moving on, the function calculates the cluster centers and radii by finding the maximum distance of points within each cluster from its center. It then adds circles to the plot for each cluster center, with a radius corresponding to the cluster's boundary. Overall, this code creates a visual representation of the k-means clustering results in a 2D plot. It clearly shows the assignments of data points to clusters and highlights the boundaries of each cluster.
So this code snippet is all about clustering data points using the k-means algorithm and then showing the clusters visually.
First things first, it gets the necessary libraries imported, like cdist, to calculate distances, and k-means for carrying out the actual clustering. Then, a k-means object is set up with 4 clusters and a fixed random state for reproducibility. Now, moving on, the k-means model is fitted to the data x, and each data point is assigned to a cluster using the predict method. To wrap it up, a plot is created using matplotlib. And here's the cool part. A function called plot_k-means, well, assume it's defined somewhere else, steps in to actually show the clusters in the plot.
When you check out the resulting plot, you'll see the data points nicely grouped into clusters, thanks to k-means.
And that's how this code does its little magic.
Alright, so what this code does is first setting up a random number generator with a seed value of 13 using NumPy. Then it takes a data matrix X and multiplies it by a 2x2 random matrix generated by that random number generator.
Moving on, it creates a figure with subplots and axes using matplotlib.
Now it initializes a k-means clustering model with 4 clusters from the scikit-learn library, setting a random state of 42. And finally, it uses a function called plot_k-means to show the clustering results.
This function plots the cluster assignments on the transformed data x_, stretched using the k-means model we just set up.
In summary, this code snippet illustrates how to manipulate data and visualize clustering results using the k-means algorithm in Python.
This code here, it has 2 functions for visualizing Gaussian mixture models, GMMs, using matplotlib. So the draw_ellipse function, what it does is it creates an ellipse on the plot to show where the data is and how spread out it is based on the mean and covariance. It takes the principal axis of the covariance matrix to decide how to orient and size the ellipse.
Then it draws the ellipse on the plot, with more ellipses drawn further out to represent more standard deviations, NSIG, away from the mean. And then we have the plot_GMM function, which fits that GM to the data, and then shows the data points colored by their labels from the GMM.
So for each Gaussian component in that GMM, it uses the draw_ellipse function to draw an ellipse weighted by the component's mean, covariance, and weight. And the weight of the component affects how transparent the ellipse is.
So, using these functions, you can see the clusters formed by the GM on a 2D dataset. It really helps you visualize where the data points are concentrated and how spread out they are. Alright, So this code snippet here is all about creating a Gaussian mixture model GMM with 4 components. It's using the Gaussian mixture class from the scikit-learn library.
Then, it goes on to plot the GMM together with the data points on a scatter plot.
Now there's a function called plot_GMM that's being used to visualize the GMM and the data distribution.
This function takes the GMM object, the data points x, and the axis x as input parameters. By looking at this plot, you can get a good sense of how well the GM fits the data distribution, and how the data points are clustered based on the GMM model. It's a helpful way to visually understand the relationships in your data.